Patronomodon has a shorter face compared to other anomodonts due to the reduced exposure of their palatine and premaxilla. This results in a shorter and smaller facial structure. Additional distinguishing features include a reduced tabular bone, a slit-like interpterygoid vacuity, 3 sacral vertebrae, and a screw-shaped jaw. These anatomical traits suggest herbivorous behavior, such as the division of the external adductor muscles in the jaw into medial and lateral components and a propilinal jaw movement for processing plant material. Its teeth are adapted for crushing and grinding as the jaws connect and move, supported by widened palatal areas for breaking down plant matter and broad external adductors. The jaw hinge is higher, there is a reduction in the number and size of teeth, and a horn extends to the jaw. The transition from its carnivorous ancestors to the herbivorous Patronomodon was rapid relative to the overall longevity of anomodont species. Suminia had grasping hands with opposable thumbs and a possibly prehensile tail, suggesting it was highly adapted for life in the trees, making it the earliest known arboreal vertebrate. Similar features wouldn't be seen again until the appearance of the Triassic Drepanosaurs 40 million years later. Its jaws also contained particularly large leaf-shaped teeth, showing a specific wear pattern that indicated it used a specialized chewing motion to break down tough plant material. Suminia exhibits a masticatory architecture similar to Dicynodonts, characterized by a sliding jaw articulation. Its canineless, large leaf-shaped teeth form an occluding dentition that is completely marginal, distinguishing it from other species with leaf-shaped teeth. This dental structure suggests herbivory and provides insights into the mechanisms of oral processing. Both proto-mammals and true mammals have independently evolved oversized fangs quite a few different times in a lot of different lineages over the last few 100 million years, and one of the first to experiment with such a feature was Pterygians. These chunky herbivorous synapsids weren't directly ancestral to modern mammals, but were instead evolutionary cousins, and their lineage eventually included tusked Dicynodonts like the world-conquering Lystrosaurus. It sported a pair of very long blade-like canine teeth in its upper jaw. Since the rest of its teeth were clearly adapted for eating plants, with one of the earliest known examples of flat grinding molars that would have allowed it to chew up tough vegetation, these fangs probably served more of a display or defensive function. The saber teeth may even have been a sexually dimorphic feature like in modern musk deer. Due to the limited number of Maiasaurus fossils, there is no direct evidence confirming their burrowing behavior. However, burrows found in South Africa and Antarctica, attributed to related Dicynodonts like Lystrosaurus, suggest it might have been burrowers. These burrows, found in Triassic strata, provided insulation and protection from predators. The size and shape of type G burrows in Antarctica, ranging from 8 to 19 centimeters in diameter, match those of Maiasaurus. Additional support comes from the fact that Maiasaurus relatives, Cysticephalus and Coingosaurus, were known burrowers. As part of the Dicynodont clade, Maiasaurus was herbivorous, with specialized jaws for processing fibrous plants. Their keratinous beak likely cut plants, while the jaw structure enabled effective shearing and grinding. Unlike some Dicynodonts with tusks used for digging, it did not have tusks and likely did not dig for food. Dicynodonts had a conservative yet variable feeding mechanism, with all members likely being herbivorous. Dicynodontoids, for example, was a substrate-targeted feeder with a narrow anterior jaw for surface vegetation collection. Most Dicynodonts used a scissor-like method for food collection and a back-and-forth grinding process for mastication. Dicynodontoids deviated from this pattern with its caniniform blades functioning like a paper cutter, though its short mouth and jaw structure reduced the effectiveness of this shearing. It had a unique jaw morphology suggesting possible grubbing for small, soft foods like roots or invertebrates, though this remains speculative. Unlike typical Dicynodonts, Dicynodontoids likely had adaptations for fast, agile locomotion, with more upright hind limbs but sprawling forelimbs for maneuverability. The incomplete skeleton of Kambesia makes it challenging to determine its exact appearance, but skull analysis suggests it was relatively small in body size. The skull length of Kambesia forensis and K. antarctica differs by only 6 mm, although often compared to the larger Kingoria, it was significantly smaller. It has been proposed that some species migrated to Antarctica to escape middle to late Permian global warming, but evidence suggests Kambesia already existed there. The small body size of Kambesia makes seasonal migration from South Africa to Antarctica unlikely. Burrows found in the lower Freemouth Formation imply a harsh environment, suggesting many species lived underground permanently. Dr. Angioxic notes that Kambesia antarctica was about the size of a small house cat, likely laid eggs, did not nurse its young, and lacked fur, with uncertain warm-bloodedness. Cysticephalus was one of the most atypical Dicynodont genera. However, it was broadly similar in anatomy to other cysticephalids, all of which share similar adaptations to digging. Its skull was broad, with laterally directed temporal openings and a sharply tapering snout, similar to extant fossorial animals. However, it has relatively large, anteriorly directed orbits, suggesting binocular vision. It had a short neck and laterally directed shoulder joint. Its forelimbs were short and powerfully built, and its manus were broad, with fused phalanges. Its hind limbs were flexible and probably could be used to move dirt out of the way. Dicynodon had large heads ending in a horny beak, with sexual dimorphism evident through the presence of canine tusks in likely males, who were also larger and had a pineal boss. They had strong limbs, sharp claws, and keen senses, with a gait similar to the high walk of crocodiles. Their simplified jaws had bones dedicated to hearing, indicating mammalian adaptation. Dicynodon were well adapted for digging, with developed muscles, a cylindrical body, and wide hands, and showed no growth marks in their humeral bone, suggesting a unique growth strategy aiding their digging ability. Dicynodon made burrows up to 50 cm deep, similar to modern gophers, likely using them to escape the desert heat. They lived gregariously but did not form large colonies, nesting near flood plains where some may have drowned. They primarily used humeral excursion for burrowing and had no known rivals, competing among themselves for scarce plant material. Fossils of infant Dicynodon in brood chambers suggest parental care, with males possibly involved in raising the young, indicated by the presence of tusks in some adults. Dicynodon were herbivorous, using their beaks to break off desert shrubs and possibly feeding on water-rich plant tubers. Sexual dimorphism was previously identified by the presence of tusks in males and differences in pelvic structure. In adult endothiodons, the lower jaw teeth are pear-shaped in cross-section, compressed distolaterally, and has posterior serrated edges while the upper jaw teeth have anterior serrated edges. In the juveniles, the lower jaw is a lot smaller and slenderer. The lower jaw contains one functional tooth row with 5 to 6 teeth. The teeth are small, conical, and pointed. The distal edge contains serrations that are just starting to appear. The juvenile teeth are much simpler and are more similar to that of a carnivore than an herbivore. It is possible that the different tooth morphology might be due to a change in diet from insectivorous or omnivorous as a juvenile to herbivorous as an adult. This would be achieved as size increases and it is more able to adapt to being herbivorous. Pristrodon were among the earliest land animals able to hear airborne sound as opposed to hearing via ground vibrations. A South African specimen studied with neutron tomography has shown evidence of an eardrum on its lower jaw, with the implication that it was hearing impaired during the act of chewing. The specimen had a 3 mm cavity for cochlea which transformed sound frequency ranges into nerve impulses sent on to the brain. Dicynodontia was originally named by the paleontologist Richard Owen. It was erected as a family of the order Anomodontia. Other groups of Anomodontia included Gnathodontia, which included Rhynchosaurus, and Cryptodontia, which included Udenodon. Cryptodonts were distinguished from Dicynodonts from their absence of tusks. Although it lacks tusks, Udenodon is now classified as a Dicynodont, and the name Cryptodontia is no longer used. Thomas Henry Huxley revised Owen's Dicynodontia as an order that included Dicynodon and Udenodon. The skulls of Cryptodontians were relatively small compared to their bodies. They had a simplified jaw structure with reduced dentition, and some species lacked teeth entirely, relying on their beaks to process food. Like other anomodonts, Cryptodontians were herbivores. They fed on a variety of plant materials, using their beaks to cut and grind vegetation. Fossils have been found in various locations, including South Africa, Russia, and other parts of the former supercontinent Gondwana. Their distribution indicates they were widespread during the Permian period. Allocephalodon skulls show the transverse anterior tip of their short snout is reinforced by the palatal ridges and ridges on the snout, resulting in biting action restricted to the tip of their jaws. The restricted jaw motion and presence of a horny beak structure suggests that they were herbivores. Based on the arid climate of the Cysticephalus zone, Allocephalodon is thought to have fed on the stems of woody plants present in the region. The most commonly occurring plants in the region, Schizoneura and Philotheca, would have been available to Allocephalodon to feed on. Bulbasaurus was ostensibly not directly named after the Pokémon Bulbasaur, but rather after its nasal bosses, which are unusually bulbous among Gaikiids. However, the describers noted that the similarity in name may not be entirely coincidental. Additionally, the specific name of the type species means leaf razor, which is most directly a reference to its keratin-covered jaws. Other distinguishing characteristics of Bulbasaurus among the Gaikiids include the hook-like beak, very large tusks, and absence of bossing on the prefrontal bone. Compared to other Dicynodonts, the shortened skull could be indicative of specific herbivory habits, such as biting off small pieces of vegetation. Pertaining to mastication, crushing action was likely more emphasized than slicing, due to structural limitations of lower jaw movement. Additionally, these limitations could have conferred a selective browser role upon Gaikia. Aside from jaw specialization, the forward position and large size of the orbits could suggest a degree of stereoscopic vision. Rotational ability of the eyes could have enabled Gaikia to see in a variety of directions, such as through notches in the frontals. Cruikshank indicated that these characteristics, along with the loss of tusks, could be suggestive of nocturnal behaviors. Like all Dicynodonts, Dicynodon was an herbivorous animal. This synapsid was toothless, except for prominent tusks, hence the name. It probably cropped vegetation with a horny beak, much like a tortoise, while the tusks may have been used for digging up roots and tubers. Many species of Dicynodon have been named, and the genus is considered a wastebasket taxon. It was a medium-sized and advanced member of the Dicynodont group. It had an average length of 1.2 meters, although size differed among species. Its fossil remains have been found in sediments of latest Permian age in South Africa and Tanzania. The type species is Dicynodon lacerticeps. A large number of species have since been placed in this genus, some of which turned out to be synonyms of other species, others have been moved to different genera. 4 to 6 species of Lystrosaurus are currently recognized, with sizes ranging from that of a small dog to 2.5 meters long. As a Dicynodont, it had only 2 teeth, a pair of tusk-like canines, and likely had a horny beak for biting off vegetation. Lystrosaurus had a heavily built body and moved with a semi-sprawling gait, having robust forelimbs adapted for digging and nesting in burrows. Remarkably, Lystrosaurus survived the Permian Triassic extinction event 252 million years ago and became the most common terrestrial vertebrate of the early Triassic, making up to 95% of individuals in some fossil beds. Various hypotheses have been proposed to explain its survival and proliferation during this period. The discovery of Lystrosaurus fossils in Antarctica by Edwin Colbert in 1970 supported the theory of plate tectonics, as these fossils were also found in southern Africa, India and China. Unlike other therapsids, Dicynodonts, including Lystrosaurus, had very short snouts and no teeth except for their upper canines. They likely used their horny beaks for shearing vegetation, which was then ground on a horny secondary palate. The jaw structure allowed for a backward and forward shearing motion, and the jaw muscles were positioned far forward on the skull, resulting in eyes set high and forward and a short face. Several theories have been proposed to explain Lystrosaurus's survival of the Permian Triassic extinction event and its subsequent dominance in the early Triassic. Growth marks in fossilized tusks suggest that Lystrosaurus in Antarctica around 250 million years ago could undergo prolonged states of torpor similar to hibernation, possibly the oldest evidence of such behavior in a vertebrate, indicating that torpor existed before mammals and dinosaurs. Another theory suggests that Lystrosaurus's burrowing lifestyle helped it survive in an atmosphere with reduced oxygen and increased carbon dioxide levels post-extinction event. Specific anatomical features such as a barrel chest, short internal nostrils, and high neural spines may have aided in respiratory efficiency, although these points have weaknesses and are subject to debate. Lystrosaurus's survival may be attributed to its lack of specialization compared to larger and more specialized Permian herbivores and carnivores. The larger size of some Lystrosaurus species may have forced them to rely on specific flora that did not survive the extinction event. The scarcity of predators capable of preying on Triassic Lystrosaurus species, with only a few exceptions like the Therocephalian and the large Archosauriform, may have contributed to a population boom in the early Triassic. Daptocephalus is an extinct genus of non-mammalian synapsid Anomodont Dicynodont, which was found in late Permian strata, in a biozone known precisely for the presence of fossils of this Dicynodont, the Daptocephalus assemblage zone, in the Karoo Basin in South Africa. An additional species, Huinii, is known from the Usulai Formation in Tanzania and was formerly assigned to the genus Dicynodon before a study in 2019 recognized that the type specimen belonged to Daptocephalus. Features of the skeleton indicate that Quasilosaurus moved with a semi-sprawling gait. The lower rear corner of the scapula was strongly ossified, which suggests that movement of the scapula contributed to the stride length of the forelimbs and reduced the sideways flexing of the body. The 5 sacral vertebrae were massive but not fused to each other and to the pelvis, making the back more rigid and reducing sideways flexing while the animal was walking. Therapsids with fewer than 5 sacral vertebrae are thought to have had sprawling limbs, like those of modern lizards. In dinosaurs and mammals, which have erect limbs, the sacral vertebrae are fused to each other and to the pelvis. Canamieria was about 3 meters in length, about the size of an ox. Although it had a large head, it was lightweight due to the size of the eye sockets and nasal cavity. It also had limb girdles which formed massive plates of bone that helped support its heavily built body. Canamieria was well adapted to living as an herbivore. It had a powerful beak and strong jaw muscles built for shearing plant material. It had a massive head with unusually large openings for the eyes, nostrils and jaw muscles. It evidently tore up roots, stripped leaves from the vegetation with its horny beak and ground them up with its toothless jaws. Ischigualastia is described as an enormous dicynodont, with a short, high skull, and lacking tusks. It is regarded as larger than its later, more famous relative Placerias, which weighed over 800 to 1,000 kilograms. It was a large quadrupedal herbivore, most common at the base of the Ischigualasto Formation. It was a common member of the local fauna, although not as abundant as the medium-sized herbivores Hyperodapodon and Exoretodon. The only danger to such a huge animal was the almost equally large carnivorous Pseudosuchian Saurosuchus and perhaps the predatory dinosaur Herosaurus, which shared the same environment. Placerias was one of the largest herbivores in the late Triassic, measuring 3.5 meters long and weighing up to 800 to 1,000 kilograms. The largest skull found had a length of 70 centimeters. Placerias had a powerful neck, strong legs, and barrel-shaped body. Its skull was characterized by two prominent tusks, which were elongated canine teeth that likely protruded from the mouth. These tusks were likely used for defense, display, or possibly for digging up roots and vegetation. Placerias was a herbivore, feeding on plants such as ferns, cycads, and other vegetation that grew abundantly during the late Triassic period. It likely lived in a variety of habitats, including floodplains, riverbanks, and forests. It is often depicted as a common and iconic representative of the late Triassic fauna, showcasing the diversity of life during this period before the rise of dinosaurs. There are possible ecological and evolutionary parallels with the modern hippopotamus, spending much of its time during the wet season wallowing in the water, chewing at bankside vegetation. Remaining in the water would also have given Placerias some protection against land-based predators such as Postosuchus. Not much is known about Angonisaurus that distinguishes it functionally different from other herbivorous Dicynodont relatives. The Dicynodont skull is highly specialized, light but strong, with the synapsid temporal openings at the rear of the skull greatly enlarged to accommodate larger jaw muscles. The front of the skull and the lower jaw are generally narrow and, in all but a number of primitive forms, toothless. Instead, the front of the mouth is equipped with a horny beak, as in turtles and ceratopsian dinosaurs. Food was processed by the retraction of the lower jaw when the mouth closed, producing a powerful shearing action, which would have enabled Dicynodonts to cope with tough plant material. The Chonarés Formation is renowned for its diverse tetrapod assemblage, including early crocodilian and dinosaurian lineages, as well as Dicynodont and Cynodont therapsids. The Dicynodont Dinodontosaurus, first described nearly 80 years ago, is the most common Dicynodont in this assemblage. A new specimen of Dinodontosaurus has been studied using 3D modeling, revealing novel anatomical features of the basicranium. The Chonarés assemblage has been correlated with the Dinodontosaurus assemblage zone of southern Brazil, due to the presence of similar species and recent absolute dating of the strata. The differences in body size distribution between the two assemblages likely reflect local climate variations, with more open landscapes in southern Brazil and more humid conditions in western Argentina during the early late Triassic. Elephantosaurus is an extinct genus of Dicynodont from the Middle Triassic Bucobay Formation. The holotype and only known specimen is a fragment of the skull that includes portions of the left interorbital region and nasal bones, and suggests a very large animal with a skull at least 30 centimeters wide. The bones of the skull roof are also unusually thick. While usually considered a member of the Stalochiridiidae, generally due to its size, it probably falls just outside the group due to its frontal bone contributing substantially to the margin of the eye socket. Jaqueliria is found near Candelaria City, in the Parana Basin of southeastern Brazil. It grew to perhaps 3 meters in length and had an estimated body mass of 300 kilograms. Throughout the early part of the Upper Triassic. Dicynodonts were absent from the Paleorota and the rhynchosaurs were the dominant herbivores. At the end of Carnian, however, the rhynchosaurs became extinct and the Dicynodonts appear in their place. Fossils of a surprisingly large Dicynodont were first reported in 2008, but it wasn't until just recently in late 2018 that this giant creature was finally given an official name, Lysowiscia bojani. Close in size to a modern elephant, at around 2.6 meters tall and 4.5 m long, it was by far the largest known example of its kind to have ever lived. And while most other Dicynodonts had upright hind limbs and sprawling forelimbs, Lysawisha seems to have developed a fully upright posture much more similar to that of quadrupedal dinosaurs and modern mammals. It was also one of the very last of its kind, living during the late Triassic of Poland, about 208 million years ago. This was around the same time that early sauropod dinosaurs were likewise first starting to experiment with gigantism, suggesting that both groups were convergently evolving to exploit newly available ecological niches. Rhechnosaurus is only known from a single fossil skull, but based on the body proportions of better-known close relatives like Cannemieria, it was probably somewhere around 1.2 meters long. It had a raised bony crest running down the middle of its snout, with deep bowl-like depressions on either side that probably served to make the crest seem visually larger it already was. They probably didn't house any weird soft tissue structures, however, since these types of Dicynodonts tended to have very extensive keratinous coverings over their snouts. It also had raised bony areas around its parietal eye, and extensive bony flanges covering most of its tusks, giving its face a sort of jowly appearance. All these features were probably for visual display and may have been brightly colored in life. Upon its discovery, Cox determined that the most significant feature of Sangosaurus was its posterodorsally directed intertemporal bar. Differences setting Sangosaurus apart include the presence of a low boss behind the pineal foramen and the posterodorsally directed intertemporal bar, which is narrower than in other stalochirids. Based on the fragments recovered, Cox suggested the skull would have been 35 to 40 centimeters long. Other features diagnosing Sangosaurus are its anteriorly taping maxilla and palatal ridges that meet at the lateral rather than anterior edge of the bone.